Imagine being at a lively dinner party. You're watching someone across the table trying to articulate a complex idea. You can see it in their eyes. The thought was majestic in the cathedral of their mind, but here in the actual room of conversation, they're struggling. They stumble, pausing to find the right words, practically stubbing their mental toes on the furniture of social pressure. And then it happens. The wit strikes. You know the type, that person who always has a razor-sharp answer for everything. They jump on the pause, delivering a quick, devastating quip that sends the table into laughter. It acts like immediate first aid total amputation of the speaker's thought, followed by a lovely bit of social cauterization. The awkwardness is gone, but so is the idea. But here is where the observation shifts. We usually idolize the wit for their speed and social agility. But watching that interaction, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of injustice. That wit was a light, fast train zooming by with empty carriages. The person who was interrupted, they were a slow freight train. And as we know, the slower trains are often the ones carrying the heaviest, most valuable cargo. The tragedy isn't just the social embarrassment, it's that the train was plundered and burned by a quacky knack for interruption before it ever arrived at the station. That opening image, it just perfectly crystallizes the central conflict we're diving into today. It's this tension between the fast-witted conversationalist who, always wins with the social moment.
Right, they win the room.
They win the room. And then there's the slow, freight-carrying thinker who actually holds the potentially profound value.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really dissect this conversational injustice. We need to understand precisely why these brilliant, complex ideas, that heavy cargo, are so frequently, derailed and just destroyed by speed, by arrogance, before they can ever deliver their potential.
And it's not just about good manners, is it?
Not at all. This is about uncovering the hidden drivers of innovation failure, and sometimes even systemic catastrophe.
It's a conflict you see everywhere. I mean, it's in every meeting room, every classroom, every public forum. The wit or, the quick thinker, they always appear to be the most competent person in the room. They're articulate, socially dominant, and efficient.
Yes, efficient is the key word. They seem to move things along.
Exactly. But that appearance of dominance, it carries this severe intellectual cost. We, as the audience, we routinely mistake that rhetorical mastery and speed for actual depth or for wisdom. And that trade-off is often fatal for good ideas.
Okay, so let's unpack the mechanism there. The wit, they restore social equilibrium by, getting rid of that awkward struggle of the slow thinker. It's a quick social win. But in doing that, you're saying they're committing a kind of intellectual crime. They're basically enforcing conformity through ridicule.
That's a great way to put it.
So what's the fundamental psychological attitude that justifies this? What allows someone to shut down complexity like that?
Well, we're really looking at a psychological attitude that philosophers have a term for. It's called epistemic arrogance.
Epistemic arrogance.
Yes, that's the core issue. It's an attitude that fundamentally undermines the very ideal of a healthy collaborative environment.
Right, what some people call a space of reasons, a place where people genuinely exchange ideas, they listen, and they let their own convictions get tested.
Precisely. Epistemic arrogance is, well, it's the firm conviction that your own knowledge and the way you acquired it is so absolutely superior and flawless that you feel no need whatsoever to engage with or listen to others.
Especially those who are struggling to form a coherent thought.
Especially them. You're effectively building a self-imposed barrier to learning. You're closing off that space of reasons because, in your mind, you already have the definitive answer.
That's a really crucial distinction. It isn't just general self-importance or, being a big ego. It's arrogance tied specifically to your intellectual standing, your process.
Yes, it's about the how of your knowing. And if this attitude is adopted by someone in a powerful position, a manager, a CEO, a team lead, the consequences are immediate and they're far-reaching.
They're magnified, right?
Exponentially. When a powerful person exhibits epistemic arrogance, the whole environment shifts. Convictions are no longer exchanged or debated, they're simply imposed from the top down. So the wit, who is operating from this position of perceived authority, intellectual, social, whatever it is.
Maybe they're just the most charismatic person in the room.
Exactly. They use that interruption less as a correction and more as a verdict. They're using their speed to short-circuit the entire process of critical evaluation before it can even begin.
I think to really see this in action, we need to get into the corporate trenches. We have this story of a strategy consultant who was nicknamed the sniper with a smile.
Ah, yes.
It just perfectly captures the consequence of this. this weaponized wit.
It really does. So this story, it comes from a consultant who was reflecting on the habits of one of his firm's senior partners. And this man, he just personified that quick, charismatic, and devastatingly sharp wit.
The wit.
He used the wit.
Yeah.
So the setting was this high-stakes strategy session. They're working for a struggling retail client. And a junior associate, probably nervous, maybe a little overwhelmed by all the senior people in the room, was trying to articulate this really complex, multifaceted idea.
Okay.
He was trying to reconceptualize their retail spaces. He kept calling them community hubs rather than just transactional points of sale.
Right. So the classic slow freight train scenario. The idea is big and complex, so the speaker's stumbling, they're pausing, they're struggling for the right words.
And in doing so, creating the perfect rhetorical target.
Exactly.
The idea was half-formed, it was messy, it was vulnerable, and it really required patience from the listeners. But the sniper, he saw his opening.
Of course he did.
And instead of engaging with the potential value in the idea, he just delivered a single, instantly hilarious metaphorical quip. It just demolished the associate's clumsy articulation. It found one tiny logical hole in the premise and blew it wide open.
And the room.
The room erupted in laughter. It was a release. You could feel the awkwardness just dissipate. Everyone was relieved.
It sounds like a moment of maximum social efficiency.
Yeah.
You know, the problem is solved, the tension is broken, everyone can move on to the next agenda item.
And that is the insidious nature of it. The wit delivers a social good, the laughter, the restoration of comfort, but it comes at the expense of an intellectual good. The sniper's takedown was, technically it was brilliant. The logic he used was flawless. But the consequence was instant humiliation for that associate and, more importantly, the immediate discarding of the community hub concept by the entire firm.
It had been socially cauterized, as you said in the opening.
Completely.
Yeah.
And the staggering irony here, which just proves the whole thesis of the slow train's valuable cargo.
Let me guess. A competitor did it.
The firm's subsequent failure to innovate. 2 years later, the consultant who told the story noted that a major competitor executed a highly refined and successful version of that exact concept, the community hub model.
Wow.
And they captured significant market share as a direct result. The company, because of one brilliant dismissive quip, ignored the core idea that became a competitor's key differentiator.
So the weaponized wit, powered by that epistemic arrogance,
Prioritized the critic's ego and their performance over the potential value of the construct. It was a clear innovation killer. The wit won the room, but the company forfeited a critical strategic advantage.
that really illustrates that arrogance isn't just, a personality flaw. It's a performative strategy. It's designed to enforce authority and delegitimize any challenges.
Absolutely.
So what are the specific rhetorical tools that the arrogant person uses to achieve this kind of conversational dominance?
Well, arrogance functions as this deliberate display of control. And research on rhetorical patterns confirms that these strategies use very specific features to project superiority.
Like what?
Heavy use of hyperbole, frequent deployment of sarcasm, and of course, ad hominem attacks. So you're targeting the individual's competence rather than the actual content of their idea.
Right, you attack the speaker, not the speech.
Exactly. These are all verbal weapons of dominance.
And I imagine this display changes based on the context. The boardroom versus a public debate, for example. The performance of arrogance isn't monolithic.
No, it adapts.
Right.
We tend to see two main styles. First, there's the overt or transactional style. This is the one you often associate with, say, media-savvy approaches or populist discourse. It's characterized by overt self-praise, high emotional confrontation, and repetitive hyperbolic claims. It's loud, it's polarizing, and it's designed for instantaneous, low-friction consumption by an audience.
And the other style?
You can contrast that with the calculated or authoritarian style. This is the style that's often deployed in institutional or academic settings. It's all about reinforcing an image of unassailable competence.
It's more subtle.
Far more subtle and often more devastating. It's conveyed through measured condescension, strategic sarcasm that, appears analytical, and crucially, strategic silence.
Strategic silence? What do you mean?
Where a leader's non-response, or maybe just a slow, dismissive shake of the head, reinforces the idea that the opponent or the dissenting view isn't even worthy of a verbal takedown.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. And in the case of the sniper, his brilliant quick quip falls squarely into that calculated authoritarian style. He used wit as a form of intellectual condescension. But both styles, overt or calculated, they serve the exact same end: control, and the active invalidation of any dissenting voices. So this brings us to a really important question about the audience, the collaborators, the people in the room.
Right.
If the slow, complex idea carries such profound, even life-saving value, and we're going to see examples where literal lives are at stake, why are we as listeners so easily swayed? Why do we laugh along with the wit and tacitly support this injustice of silencing the struggling thinker?
This is where it gets really interesting for me, because the blame starts to shift from the arrogant individual to all of us, to our shared cognitive machinery. It's not just a social flaw, it's a systematic error that's built right into how our brains filter information. We are, in a sense, slaves to a cognitive shortcut that's known as the availability heuristic.
The availability heuristic, yes.
Yeah.
A core mental shortcut. The underlying principle is almost deceptively simple.
Yeah, break it down for us.
If something comes quickly and easily to your mind, you judge it as being more important, more probable, or more relevant than alternatives that are not as readily retrieved. Our brains favor ease of processing.
So the mental availability of an idea's consequences is directly proportional to how big or probable we perceive those consequences to be.
Exactly. This inherently biases us toward any information that is highly available. We can also link this to something called the fluency heuristic, which is a related concept.
Okay.
The fluency heuristic is where the sheer ease of processing a piece of information implies its truth or its correctness.
Because it's smooth.
Because it's smooth. It feels right. So the wit delivers a critique that is linguistically fluid, it's highly available, and it's vivid often because it's funny or shocking.
Right.
The complex, slow idea, by its very nature, requires effort. It requires cognitive friction and memory retrieval. It's low availability. Therefore, the brain instantly judges it as less feasible, less important, and just less worthy of retention.
This is why those classic examples of availability bias are so pervasive. That frequency judgment error is a perfect illustration.
It is. If you ask a group of people whether there are more words in the English language that start with the letter K or have K as the third letter.
Right, I know this one.
The overwhelming majority will incorrectly guess words that start with K.
And why is that?
Because the rapid, easy recall of words like king or kite or kitten makes them mentally available. It requires a lot of concerted effort and, frankly, statistical analysis to realize that words like acknowledge or poker or speaker mean that the third letter pay category is statistically almost twice as common.
So our judgment is guided by the ease of retrieval, not by the actual data.
Never by the data.
Always.
By the ease.
And of course, media coverage exploits this relentlessly. It drives what's called the vividness effect. The news delivers these conversational shark attacks over and over, and it shapes our entire perception of reality.
Oh, absolutely. This aligns so strongly with what's known as cultivation theory in media studies. The news reports, the sensational, the vivid, the unusual, homicides, plane crashes, or, yes, shark attacks. They are vivid, they are immediate, and they stick in our collective consciousness.
And because they stick, we think they're common.
We judge these widely reported high availability events as far more likely causes of death than common, less sensational events like common diseases or falling down the stairs. The media reports the shocking, and we internalize the shocking as probable.
And the fast-witted quip is the conversational shock event.
It is. It's immediate, it's highly memorable, and it sinks the difficult, slow idea instantly.
Okay, so we have to look at the systemic consequences of this preference for speed over substance.
Yes.
The comparison between fast and slow innovations in history gives us the hard proof that this cognitive bias isn't benign. It costs lives, and it costs decades of progress. We are talking specifically about a medical revolution, the adoption of ether versus the adoption of antisepsis.
This case study is absolutely critical. It proves that we consistently confuse the speed of an idea's adoption with the importance of that innovation.
They're not the same thing.
Not at all. Speed is purely a measure of how low the cognitive and institutional friction is. Importance, on the other hand, relates to actual societal value. And what's fascinating is that they're often inversely related.
The more important, the slower it is.
Often, yes. Let's use a model that assesses adoption based on 5 factors: relative advantage, compatibility, complexity, trialability, and observability. Each one is rated from, say, -3, a severe hindrance, to +3, a strong accelerator.
Okay, so let's start with ether, the anesthetic. Discovered in 1846, and it spread globally, became standard operating procedure in just 7 years. I mean, that's lightning fast adoption for the 19th century.
Incredibly fast. On that model, it scored a net total of +6. a very positive score.
So why? What made it so fast?
Well, the relative advantage for the patient was immense, obviously. No pain, that's a +3. But crucially, the relative advantage for the doctor was also huge.
Ah, I hadn't thought of that.
They could now work methodically without the patient screaming, which dramatically improved their concentration. So that's another +3. It also had high observability.
The benefit was immediate.
Immediate and obvious. The
Yeah.
patient is not screaming. That's a +3. And finally, it had good trialability. You could assemble the equipment and just try it on one patient without permanently altering your entire routine. That's a +1. So the immediate, observable, easy benefits made it the fast train.
Okay. Now let's contrast this with antisepsis. This was championed by Joseph Lister starting in 1867. This was the innovation that addressed post-surgical infection, which was killing up to half of all surgical patients at the time, a profound source of mortality.
The biggest killer in hospitals.
So how fast was the train carrying this immensely valuable cargo?
It took a full generation, sometimes 40 or 50 years, to be fully adopted, despite addressing the greatest source of human suffering and death in hospitals.
A full generation.
It was the definition of the slow train. It scored a disastrous net total of -12 in that adoption model.
-12, that's a staggering amount of quantified resistance. So what made this literally life-saving idea so low availability and so low fluency for the entire medical establishment?
Every single factor that accelerated ether actively suppressed antisepsis. The core issue was compatibility and trialability.
Okay.
For the professional, the surgeon, the relative advantage was initially perceived as highly negative. We'll give it a -3. Lister was forcing these surgeons, who considered themselves gentlemen of science, to operate in a constant mist of carbolic acid.
Which smelled terrible, I imagine.
It smelled awful. It required them to wear newly sterilized gowns. It demanded tedious, constant cleaning protocols. This required massive, intrusive changes to deeply institutionalized 19th century professional norms. That's a -3 for compatibility.
And the trialability.
The trialability was the true killer, another -3. You couldn't just try antisepsis once on a single patient.
I see.
You had to completely overhaul the entire operating theater. You had to change every procedure, maintain those rigorous, annoying changes for weeks on end, and then compare the survival rates of your patients statistically against historical mortality data.
So the benefits were not immediate.
Not at all. They were statistical and they were deferred. This made the observability extremely low, another -3. You couldn't see it work in the moment.
So the fast, high availability idea, ether, which solved comfort, it zoomed ahead and became the immediate norm.
Right.
And the slow, low availability, complex, life-saving idea, antisepsis, was professionally ridiculed, dismissed, and actively resisted for decades. All because it required effort, it was incompatible with existing practice, and its benefits were statistical rather than observable in the moment.
And that is the chilling lesson here. The complexity, the low trialability, and the lack of quick observability caused the medical establishment to fail in its most fundamental responsibility. The slow train was carrying millions of human lives, and its low fluency, the sheer difficulty of adopting it, made it the socially and professionally dismissed idea for far, far too long. It led to generations of avoidable death.
The systemic tragedy of antisepsis really proves that we have to develop a concept we could call strategic patience. It's a conscious, intentional slowing of the evaluation process to make sure that those profound, high-value insights have the time and the space they need to be properly evaluated.
We need to move beyond just, acknowledging that the slow idea has value. We need to actually implement organizational structures and mental shifts that actively protect that unconventional thought from immediate judgment. It's about building a safe harbor for complexity.
So let's return to an anecdote that shows the strategic importance of this kind of patience in a modern high-stakes setting. This is the story of Arthur, the engineer at the aerospace company.
Right, so this happened during a critical design review. They were looking at a failing turbine component. And the room was just full of these highly efficient, highly articulate engineers, the fast thinkers.
The wits of the engineering world.
Exactly. They spoke in bullet points. They were rapidly iterating on existing solutions. Their goal was speed and efficiency in generating fixes. But they were all circling the wrong target. They were just addressing the symptoms, not the foundational cause of the failure.
And meanwhile, Arthur, the older engineer, he was the embodiment of the slow train.
He was. He just sat there in silence. For a staggering 20 minutes, as all this frantic energy peaked, he was simply staring intently at the schematic, just processing the dense complexity of it. He offered no bullet points, no witty retorts, no quick fixes.
And the room was getting impatient, I assume.
Very. When the manager finally, almost in desperation, turned to him, you could feel the room sigh. Arthur was known for being slow, for struggling with articulation, for requiring these long pauses. He just didn't have the rhetorical fluency of his faster colleagues.
But what he did have, though, was the strategic patience to let the entire structure of the problem really sink in.
That's it, exactly. When he finally spoke, and it was slowly, deliberately, often struggling to find the precise technical vocabulary, he identified a critical, subtle, harmonic vibration issue that had been missed by every single other person.
Wow.
The fast thinkers were so busy efficiently cycling through easy solutions and familiar patterns that they had cognitively bypassed the complex foundational fault. Arthur delivered the difficult truth that saved the entire design, but only because the environment, however briefly and reluctantly, accommodated his 20 minutes of silence.
So the takeaway there is that we absolutely must recognize that a lack of polish or a struggle for articulation or just slowness, it's often simply a symptom of handling incredibly heavy, complex cargo.
Yes. Profound insight rarely arrives wrapped in a slick, highly available, witty package. It's usually messy.
And this patient evaluation, it must extend to actively embracing dissent. Because organizational consensus, which is so often driven by the quickest, most dominant voices, it naturally encourages convergent thinking.
Which is comforting. It feels like progress, but it blinds you.
Right. So dissent, the actual voicing of opposition to established norms, that's the real catalyst for genuine innovation. It stimulates divergent thought. We remember historical dissenters like Galileo challenging the core cosmological model, or Rosa Parks. But how do you cultivate this in a professional setting where dissent feels like an attack on the team's identity?
That is where the leader's intervention is absolutely critical. We saw this in the story of Sarah, the junior developer who proposed what felt, to everyone in the room, like corporate heresy.
Okay, what did she do?
So the team was focused obsessively on maximizing user engagement time. It's the holy grail of the growth-obsessed tech industry.
Of course, more time on app.
Exactly. Sarah stood up and proposed intentionally building friction into the app to lower user engagement time.
That is the ultimate low fluency idea. It's counterintuitive, it sounds socially unacceptable in that context, and it directly challenges the entire economic model of the organization. The wit would have just crushed that idea instantly.
And the reaction was a dead silence. It was heavy with judgment. But the leader, rather than deploying that quick filter of dismissal, showed strategic patience. He temporarily suspended judgment. And he asked the one question that creates safety for a slow, difficult idea.
Which was?
He said, walk us through the world where that works.
Oh, that's good.
He didn't say that's dumb. He just said, I don't see it yet, but convince me.
In that moment of suspension.
That intentional space for the slow train to articulate its complex cargo, it allowed the team to realize they could position themselves as a digital well-being model. They could deliberately set themselves apart from the addictive, growth-at-all-costs philosophy of their competitors.
So the idea that was initially ridiculed
became their strongest market differentiator. Precisely because it challenged the industry's dogma. It just proves that so much innovation lies in those socially uncomfortable, low availability ideas.
And if we acknowledge that these unconventional or complex ideas often come from people who are more junior or quieter or outside the dominant culture, then the need for this kind of patience becomes a really serious issue of organizational fairness and equity.
Absolutely. Valuing the slow train means you have to address inherent power imbalances.
Right.
Leaders must actively uphold fairness to ensure that dissenting voices, especially those that are marginalized by seniority or just a lack of rhetorical polish, are not instantly stifled. Those unconventional voices are often the ones carrying the truly novel insights because they aren't constrained by the dominant existing orthodoxies. So if the disease, as we've been saying, is epistemic arrogance and a cognitive preference for speed,
Right.
then the structural cure requires cultivating two twin virtues, the individual virtue of intellectual humility and the organizational climate of psychological safety.
Let's start with intellectual humility, or IH. I think it's often deeply misunderstood. It gets conflated with low self-esteem or, thinking poorly of your own capabilities, but it's far more strategic than that.
It is. IH is really defined as recognizing the limits of one's own knowledge and actively acknowledging one's fallibility. It's what's called an epistemic virtue, because it focuses on a realistic assessment of what you actually know.
It's that old Socratic idea, right? I neither know nor think I know.
Exactly. It means recognizing that the cathedral of your mind might have some some structural weaknesses. The key components include refraining from believing your views are inherently superior, maintaining a genuine openness to new ideas, even uncomfortable ones, and being willing to acknowledge when you make a mistake.
So it's positively associated with open-mindedness, empathy.
And a tolerance for truly diverse perspectives, yes.
So when leaders or even just collaborators actively cultivate this IH, what are the measured practical benefits beyond just, being a nicer person to be around?
The benefits are profound, especially in complex decision-making environments. Internally, individuals with higher IH demonstrate improved decision-making quality.
How so?
They're just more likely to process information that genuinely enhances their knowledge, rather than just engaging in confirmation bias, looking for things they already agree with. They're more accurate in critical thinking tasks, and they're less prone to overclaiming their own competence.
And what about externally, in terms of how they collaborate with others?
IH is an incredibly powerful conflict moderator. It leads to more positive social interactions and makes compromise significantly more likely. And that's because the individual is less emotionally invested in the necessity of being right all the time.
That makes sense.
And maybe most critically in our current information landscape, IH is strongly correlated with a reduced susceptibility to misinformation and conspiracy theories. Open-mindedness, which is driven by humility, acts as a primary bulwark against believing narratives that lack good evidence.
And on the flip side, the dangers of overconfidence, the absolute opposite of IH, are well-documented causes of catastrophic error. We're talking massive stock market bubbles, failed wars, unnecessary strikes, crippling lawsuits.
It shows that epistemic arrogance isn't just a personality flaw, it's an existential risk factor for any organization.
Precisely. But an individual's virtue isn't enough to protect that slow train.
No, it's not.
You need to build this virtue into the team's structure, and that requires the other half of the cure, that structural element of psychological safety. This is a group-level climate phenomenon.
Yes, it's that shared belief in a group that you will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes.
It is the absolute foundation for organizational resilience.
It is. We saw with the sniper that interpersonal risk, the risk of humiliation, translates directly into business risk. Or in the case of antisepsis, human mortality risk. When employees are afraid, companies miss every single signal. They miss insights, preventable mistakes go completely unchecked, and innovation opportunities are lost because the slow, difficult idea stays silent.
And there's a neurobiological reason for this, isn't there?
There is. It's crucial to understand that fear, especially the fear of social humiliation, triggers an ancient neurobiological response. When your brain detects a social threat, the prefrontal cortex, the center for complex thought, for problem solving, for creative articulation, it begins to shut down.
So you literally can't think straight.
You become physically and cognitively incapable of articulating the complex thought. By removing the fear of punishment, psychological safety keeps the thinking brain online. It enables that slow freight train to actually move forward and deliver its cargo.
But safety can't exist in a vacuum. Otherwise, you just get a comfortable, stagnant team. It has to be paired with high standards, with accountability. That balance is the sweet spot.
That balance is essential for any high-performing ethical team. If you have safety without standards, you have a comfortable but complacent environment. It lacks rigor and can even mediate unethical shortcuts because there's no accountability.
And the other way around.
Standards without safety. That creates silent, terrified teams. They appear agreeable on the surface, but they're actually hiding every potential flaw and challenge because they fear the professional guillotine.
So the optimal climate is high safety, high standards.
Exactly. It is safe to speak up, and everyone is committed to excellence. This combination is what ensures that the struggle of complexity is protected, but the ultimate output must still be rigorous.
Okay, so if we want to stop being the wit and start cultivating this climate to actively await the slow train, what are the 3 concrete leadership imperatives that can increase psychological safety?
Well, they require deliberate, consistent effort from anyone in a leadership position. First, leaders must frame the work as learning.
What does that look like in practice?
Instead of viewing a challenge as a test of competence, which triggers fear, leaders have to deliberately reframe it as an exploration. They should use language like, "We've never done this before, so we are all learning. We need everyone's input to uncover the flaws and get it right." This shifts the focus from avoiding fault to maximizing exploration.
Okay, that makes sense. The second imperative, then, must address the problem of silence, actively inviting input, especially from those who don't naturally dominate the conversation.
Yes. The second is to invite participation. Leaders must proactively use open-ended questions to signal that dissenting or unconventional input is not just tolerated, it is required.
So instead of asking, does anyone disagree, which just invites silence.
Right, which is a terrible question they should ask. Who has a different perspective that challenges our current path? Or, what assumption are we making here that we're probably wrong about? This gives explicit permission for cognitive risk-taking.
And finally, the reaction to bad or complicated news is the true measure of a safe culture.
Absolutely. The third imperative is to respond productively, always with appreciation, not with blame. When you're presented with hard news or unexpected complexity, or even an initially absurd idea like Sarah's,
To lower engagement.
right, the leader's response must validate the messenger and then focus on the solution. Instead of demanding, why did this happen, they respond, thank you for bringing that insight forward. Now, how can we help you solve this? This crucial step ensures the messenger will speak up again because they know their safety is prioritized over the immediate feeling of discomfort caused by the bad news.
And for those of us listening who want to strengthen our own intellectual humility to combat that internal wit impulse, what are the most effective individual exercises we can do?
You can actively train this virtue. It's like a muscle. One highly effective technique is adopting a third-person perspective.
Okay.
When you're faced with a challenging disagreement, try to approach it as an outside observer would. This psychological distancing, it reduces your emotional investment and it increases objectivity. It shifts your focus from being individually right to focusing on the mutual goal of finding the best solution.
Another I've heard is cultivating a pure growth mindset.
Yes, that's a big one. A growth mindset regarding intelligence. If you genuinely believe that intelligence and skills can be developed through effort, you are automatically less threatened by acknowledging what you don't yet understand. It reduces that ego defense mechanism that might otherwise shut down the slow train of a complex idea from someone else.
And finally, a habit of rigorous self-assessment.
That is critical evaluation. Actively assessing the limits of your own knowledge. You have to force yourself to specifically ask, what evidence am I overlooking here? Could my current perspective be fundamentally wrong? Would one piece of additional data radically change my view? These structured questions dismantle the automatic impulse of epistemic arrogance, and they slow down your internal reaction, allowing time for that complex, low-fluency idea to be properly considered.
So we have traced this challenge all the way from the micro level of a dinner party quip to the macro level of systemic failure in medicine and innovation. The quick wit, the fast, easily digestible idea. They are highly seductive because they align so perfectly with our cognitive biases and our social preference for instant efficiency.
The wit is the perfect embodiment of the availability heuristic, and their methods are almost always backed by a degree of epistemic arrogance.
But the record of history, as we've seen, it proves that the most profound insights, the ones that drive true paradigm shifts, that save millions of lives or prevent catastrophic errors, are complex. They're unpolished, and they require intentional, difficult patience to hear.
Valuing conversational speed and ego over intellectual substance leads to massive systemic failures and costs everything from market share and competitive advantage to, as we saw, generations of human progress.
The ultimate measure of intellectual maturity, then, lies not in the sharpness of our immediate retort, but in the sustained individual and organizational commitment to create a climate where the slow, heavy freight train of difficult truth is not just allowed to arrive safely, but is actively and patiently awaited at the station. This is the only way we ensure that the valuable cargo is delivered, not plundered and burned.